You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. And on today's episode of the podcast, we are reviewing the second test between New Zealand and Australia from Hagley Oval in Christchurch. And it was quite an interesting test match. It was an exciting test match. It ebbed and flowed. And Australia were able to get the job done in the end. A superb innings from Carey was able to get the job done and get Australia over the line. Australia keep finding ways to win from difficult situations. They were chasing 279. They were 4 for 34, then 5 for 80. And then Alex Carey did what he did and scored 98 not out. You know, very good partnership with Marsh of over 140. Marsh made 80. Cummins did what he did at the end in his cameo and got Australia over the line. And Australia just find ways to keep winning from difficult positions. They haven't been playing at their best, Australia, but always someone stands up and they always produce a performance of substance, which gets them over the line. And that's what we saw in this test match. On the other hand, New Zealand should have won this test match, really. But yet again, missed opportunities with the bat and with the ball cost them dearly, and especially drop catches in the field, as we'll talk about as we progress in this review of this second test. But for New Zealand, the home side didn't do themselves any favours again. Yet again, missed opportunities, and the mental block is quite evident when it comes to playing Australia. And they just didn't do enough to try and overcome those challenges that they had in this test match. So Australia too good in the end. So plenty to talk about, plenty to dissect from this second test and talk about how both New Zealand and Australia went about their business, really, with bat and ball and in the field, and both teams, what could they have done better? So plenty to talk about. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. And let's have a look at the match summary, first of all, and see how this match panned out the way it did. New Zealand batted first after Australia won the toss. New Zealand was sent in by Pat Cummins, and they were bowled out for 162. New Zealand, Tom Latham top scored with 38. Josh Hazlewood took 5 wickets for Australia. Australia were bowled out for 256 in their first innings. Marnus Labuschagne top scored with 90. Matt Henry took 7 wickets for New Zealand. New Zealand, in their second innings, were bowled out for 372. Rachin Ravindra top scored with 82, and Pat Cummins took 4 wickets for Australia. And Australia needed 279 runs to win. They chased down the runs with ease, finishing on 7 for 281. Alex Carey top scored with 98 not out, and Ben Sears, the debutant, took 4 wickets for New Zealand. Australia won by 3 wickets, and Alex Carey was named player of the match for his 98 not out. So that's how the whole test match panned out across the 4 days. And what were the key moments and key factors from the second test between New Zealand and Australia? Well, really, there was only really one key moment and key factor that decided this test match, and that was Rachin Ravindra's drop catch of Mitchell Marsh. Mitchell Marsh on 28. It was the second over of day 4. In the run chase, it was a key moment. Mitchell Marsh went on to score 80, added 140 for the 6-wicket partnership with Carey, which set the foundation for Australia to chase down 279 in the end. That was pretty much a pivotal moment in this test match that really swung the test match in Australia's favour in the run chase. And unfortunately for New Zealand, that was a moment where things could have been a lot different for them if that catch was taken by Rachin Ravindra. So those were the key moments and the key factors from the second test between New Zealand and Australia from the Hagley Oval. Well, let's talk about how both New Zealand and Australia performed in the second test here at the Hagley Oval. And let's start with the New Zealand side first. Talk about New Zealand's team performance across the board with both bat and ball, but we'll start with the New Zealand batters and talk about their performance in this second test. Bowled out for 162. in the first innings after being sent in. Batting collapse, lost 10 wickets for 115 runs in 27 overs, just summed up how New Zealand's batting has been across this series. They batted a lot better in the second innings, scoring 372, setting Australia 279 to win. Also wiping out the deficit of 94 runs on the first innings after Australia got a first innings lead. So they batted much better in the second innings, New Zealand. Unfortunately for them, they weren't able to make the most of that opportunity. In the end, Australia chased down 279, as we know, and New Zealand missed out on a golden opportunity to really put the game out of reach for Australia. Yet again, common theme from New Zealand throughout this whole series is that they lack partnerships, poor shot selection. We saw that in the first innings where they were bowled out cheaply for only 162 from 45.2 overs. And as I mentioned, lost 10 wickets for 115 runs in 27 overs. And also they missed opportunities with the bat, New Zealand. Look, mainly in the second innings, they batted a lot better. And they missed golden opportunities. And you can't afford to do that against good quality sides like Australia. When they give you opportunities, you've got to make the most of them. And New Zealand could have got a lead of 300 plus. And I think deep down inside, when New Zealand set Australia 279 runs to win, they probably thought deep down inside that that's probably not going to be enough on this type of surface. When the ball gets a bit softer, the pitch was flattening out, the Australian batters haven't been at 100%, but they can still chase down any target that you set. And New Zealand thought, a target of 300 plus was needed. And it was. You have a look at New Zealand's second innings batting. You have a look at the starts. Latham, 73. Williamson, 51. Ravinder, 82. Daryl Mitchell, 58. One of those four batters I mentioned there, one of them's got to get 100 and score a big 100. Also, partnerships, 105 for the second wicket between Latham and Williamson, 123 for the fourth wicket between Ravinder and Mitchell. Those partnerships needed to go on for New Zealand if they were going to get a total and a target of 300 plus to set Australia to win this test match. Unfortunately, those partnerships fell at the wrong time. They lost those partnerships and wickets at the wrong time. And that really set New Zealand back because Australia were able to pick up a wicket or two. And that got the momentum back in Australia's favour. And New Zealand missed out on those golden opportunities. So yet again, for New Zealand, the common theme in this series is they missed golden opportunities. They weren't able to grab these moments. New Zealand are a team that they do well, New Zealand. They punch above their weight, as we know. We've seen that in many performances that they've done over the years. The World Cup final in 2019, for example, and other events in world cricket. But New Zealand, they are a team that does well when their backs are up against the wall. And they always find a way to come back. They got themselves back into the game with their bowling performance after bowling Australia out for 200 odd. And they got back within the game. It was only 94 runs, the difference between the two sides on the first innings. So they always do well to come back, New Zealand, and get themselves back into the game. But when it's an opportunity to try and force the game forward, try and assert their dominance and position of dominance in a test match, they don't seem to grasp those opportunities. And in the second innings, as I mentioned before, they missed opportunities there. The second innings batting to set Australia 300 plus to win, it was always going to be difficult regardless. If you're chasing 350 plus, that's a big psychological blow. Not many teams chase down 350 in the last innings, regardless if the pitch is flat or good or whatever. If you lose a couple of wickets early, then it can really set some nervous energy in the batting. So they missed a big opportunity there, New Zealand. That was their golden opportunity, and they missed out on that. And 50s don't win your test matches. You need someone to score a big score. There was a lot of starts. Those partnerships were established between Latham and Williamson, Ravinder and Mitchell. They looked comfortable. They were batting really well. They probably batted their best throughout this whole entire series, to be honest. And they weren't able to grasp the opportunity. And that's the frustrating thing. New Zealand would look back in this result and say, you know what, if we batted a bit better in the second innings, if we took the opportunity when it was there, given us on a platter, we could have batted Australia out of this test match. We could have set them 350 plus, 300 plus, 350. But it wasn't to be the case, and they missed out on that opportunity. So they've only got themselves to blame, New Zealand. Yes, there was some good late order hitting in the second innings. Kugelin got 44. He got a life. Labuschagne dropped him. He went on to make 53 for the 7th wicket with Glenn Phillips. But apart from that, New Zealand, really the top order really had to set the foundation. They got partnerships established. They got starts, Latham, Williamson, Ravinder and Mitchell. But as I mentioned, they weren't able to capitalize on that. So looking back, New Zealand, they'll be saying if we had those partnerships continue on, it would have been a lot different for New Zealand in terms of their prospects of winning this test match. And setting the target of 300 plus for Australia to try and chase down. So with that being said, that's the one thing that New Zealand would be looking back in this test match is saying, well, we batted poorly in the first innings. Whenever you get bowled out for 160 odd, you're always going to be on the back foot in the test match regardless. And a batting collapse happened there. Also in the second innings, missed opportunities. We weren't able to grab them and grasp them. So I think for New Zealand, definitely in this second test match, they had their moments with the bats. Unfortunately, some misexecution, poor shot selection, losing wickets at the wrong time, not capitalizing on opportunities cost them dearly in this test match with the bats. So I think the batting group will be very disappointed with how they performed in this test match as a group. So that's the batting. Let's talk about New Zealand's bowlers and talk about the bowling performance in this second test. Well, the bowling display from New Zealand was a bit indifferent in this test match. In the first innings, they did well to bowl Australia out for 256 and saw New Zealand only 94 runs behind Australia on the first innings, which is not a bad result. Any lead under 100 runs is not bad in terms of keeping aside to a reasonable first innings lead. But it was the second innings bowling that was poor, really, from New Zealand. And yet again, just like the batting, they missed opportunities with the ball. And it happened in the second innings. In the second innings, Australia were 4 for 34, then 5 for 80. As soon as Travis Head got out early on day 4, slashing one to point, Australia 5 down for 80, chasing 279. You're always going to back the bowling side to win from that position, no matter what. Unfortunately for New Zealand, they didn't grasp that opportunity. Mitchell Marsh was dropped on the previous ball before Travis Head got out. Rachin Ravinder dropped him at point, as we mentioned earlier, and that was one of the key moments that really affected the course of the run chase in the second innings and really changed the momentum in Australia's favour. But also missed opportunities. Not capitalising when Australia were 4 for 34, 5 for 80. Not really putting much pressure on Marsh and Carey because Marsh and Carey were able to score freely. There wasn't really much pressure being put on them. Tim Southee's tactics were questioned, as always in this series, but in the second innings, his tactics were really questioned by New Zealand fans, but also pundits alike as well in New Zealand, is that he didn't quite get it right. And of course, as a captain, you're not going to get everything right. You're not going to have the right tactics. You're not going to make the right decisions. You're going to have decisions that you will have to make, and they probably won't turn out the way you would have wanted. But with him, I think Tim Southee and obviously New Zealand were a bit panicked as soon as Carey and obviously Marsh started to score freely. The ball was getting softer. The pitch was getting flatter. Runs were being scored. There wasn't many dot balls or pressure being built by the New Zealand bowlers. They didn't quite handle that in the best way they could have. Maybe Tim Southee could have changed his fields a little bit better. Maybe he could have brought on Phillips earlier, the spinner. Maybe missed a trick there, maybe. This is all in hindsight. So for New Zealand, definitely missed opportunities with the ball. Really cost them really in this test match. And that will be the disappointing factor for New Zealand, is that we had our moments with the ball. We had opportunities to put Australia away, but we weren't able to grab them. Just like with the batting performance, they weren't able to do that. And that's a disappointing factor if you're a New Zealand supporter, definitely. So yeah, with that being said, really, as soon as Carey and Marsh did what they did, Obviously, New Zealand got two wickets back to back. Obviously, Ben Sears got rid of Mitchell Marsh. He obviously got rid of Mitchell Starc next ball. Could have got Pat Cummins out for a hat trick, but Cummins did well to play it out and get 4 runs down to third man off the outside edge. And they were able to do what they needed to do in terms of, being able to get Australia over the line. But for New Zealand, missed opportunities with the ball really cost them. And just dealing with that pressure, really, and not being able to find an answer, really. I think Tim Southee was just Tim Southee was probably just waiting for a mistake to happen, which you can't do. You got to try and make something happen, really, as a captain. You got to try and make something happen. You got to, make those decisions. Try and make something happen. That will change the course of the match. So Southee didn't really do that. Obviously, lack of experience as captain. Hasn't been at the job for long since he took over from Kane Williamson. And obviously, Pat Cummins is a clearer, better captain than Southee. Obviously, it was plain to see that in this series. But for New Zealand, and they weren't able to really capitalise on that golden opportunity as well. As I mentioned, they picked up 2 wickets back-to-back. They could have got Cummins out cheaply. But obviously, they would have been wary because of Pat Cummins and what he's done in the past, hitting the winning runs and being there at the end. Obviously, did that on his Test debut in South Africa, did that at Edgbaston last year in the Ashes. So they knew that he was more than capable of sticking around with Carey, and that's what he did. So they got it wrong to him when he came out there, and that partnership was able to score freely, and they just sort of lost the plot, really. So for the New Zealand bowlers, it was a bit of a mixed performance across the 2 innings. Obviously, Matt Henry bowled well. He took 7 wickets in the first innings and really got New Zealand back into this Test match. But unfortunately, in the second innings, the bowling performance fell off, and it was pretty poor in the end and disappointing from New Zealand's point of view. So New Zealand, reflecting back on this Test match in terms of the bowling performance, they'll be saying, we had opportunities, we had our moments, we couldn't grab them. Didn't make the most of them. We dropped catches in the field as well. They were costly. And we just didn't really capitalize on the key moments and opportunities. If New Zealand did that with the ball, then it would have been a different story. It would have been a different story, and it could have been a different result in the end. But it wasn't to be, and New Zealand have only got themselves to blame. So that's New Zealand's bowling performance. And pretty much that's New Zealand's performance across the Test match, really. They'll be very disappointed with how it panned out, and they weren't able to grab opportunities, really. That's the common theme from New Zealand in this series. Golden opportunities with the bat and with the ball. They weren't able to take them, and they weren't able to make the most of those opportunities. And that's why they've lost this series 2-0, and that's why they lost this Test match by 3 wickets. So New Zealand disappointed for sure about the result from this Test match. Let's talk about Australia's performance and talk about how Australia went about things in this second Test against New Zealand. We'll start with the batters, and we'll talk about the batting overall, first of all. Still not at 100%, the batting for Australia, but they did enough to get the job done. Got to a good first innings lead of 94 runs after making 256, after New Zealand were bowled out for 162. So they could have got a 100-run lead, but 94 runs on the first innings was not a bad lead. Any lead over 50 is not a bad lead in the first innings. And obviously in the run chasing 279 to win, they were in trouble. 4 for 34, 5 for 80, and then you enter Mitchell Marsh and Carey's partnership, plus the innings they played, and then Carey and Cummins, that partnership towards the end, pretty much got Australia over the line and won this Test match by 3 wickets. So across the board, Australia's batting, still some concerns, especially with the top order. Smith, Khawaja were disappointing again. Travis Head had an indifferent Test match. Green didn't really show the form that he showed in the first Test after making that century. And And Marnus Labuschagne was back in the runs. He scored 90 in the first innings, and that was pretty critical. But then in the second innings, just got out to an it was a really ugly way that he got out Labuschagne, trying to work it to the leg side, leaning edge, got caught by Sears, caught and bowled, and just sums up where Marnus Labuschagne is at the moment. But for him, I suppose, confidence-wise, that he was able to score 90 runs in the first innings. So at least Marnus scored some runs in this test match to try and get him back into some form. So obviously, apart from that, Australia's batting top order needs work still going forward. But that's a conversation and discussion for another day. But really, let's talk about Alex Carey. He's the star of the moment. He's the star of the show. He's the man of the moment. 98 not out for him in the second innings. Career-defining innings for Alex Carey, really. There was pressure on him. He made some low scores recently with the bat. He got out in a very ugly way in the first innings, played a sweep shot off Phillips, which he didn't really time or execute as well. Hit it straight to the fielder in the first innings, which was an ugly dismissal. But in the second innings, where he was under pressure, had to stand up, he did the job. And I thought it was an outstanding innings from him. Just cool, calm, collective under pressure. And I think batting with Mitchell Marsh really helped him, I think, because both Marsh and Carey are attacking aggressive players naturally. They like bat on ball. And I think with Mitchell Marsh doing what he did, I think that really made Carey comfortable and say to himself, well, the only way we're going to get out of this bit of a jam, 5 down for 80, the only way we're going to get out of it is that we either go into our shell, be defensive, get bowled out for under 100 and lose the test match by over 100 runs, or we go on the attack and just really put the pressure back on the New Zealand bowlers. And that's what he did, along with Marsh. And that's why the partnership was very successful. 140 for the 6-wicket Marsh and Carey put on together. And he played really well, Carey. He really stood up when needed. And that was good to see from Alex Carey. And he kept really well in this test match. Despite the match-winning innings of 98 not out, let's talk about the keeping as well. 10 catches in the match equals the record with Adam Gilchrist for the most dismissals by an Australian keeper in a test match. He kept really well, Carey. There was only one drop catch that he dropped, and that was Tom Latham in the second innings. But apart from that, he was pretty immaculate with the gloves, Carey. So he's keeping well. This innings will give him tremendous confidence going forward, knowing that I can do it. Now, this is not the first time. Now, many people have said, yes, it's good to see Alex Carey stand up and do this. But it's not the first time Alex Carey has actually hit the winning runs or batted to win a game for Australia in terms of runs off his own bat. It's not the first time Alex Carey has done this. And I'm surprised that a lot of people didn't mention it or talked about it. But when I was watching this test match, I was watching Carey bat. And then after the test match finished, I sort of remembered the innings that Carey played in Manchester. It was back in 2020. Obviously, it was an ODI. So that's why it's not talked about, because it's an ODI. This is a test match. But let's just put that to one side for a moment. In that game in Manchester, Alex Carey scored 100 and was involved in a match-winning partnership with Glenn Maxwell. Now, it was a 3-game series. Australia won the series 2-1. It was at Old Trafford. It was in 2020. It was the last game of the series. Australia were chasing 303 runs to win. They won by 3 wickets in the end, Australia. Alex Carey came in when Australia were 5 for 73 in that run chase. He joined Glenn Maxwell. The pair of them put on 212 for the 6th wicket, and both of them scored hundreds. So it's not the first time Alex Carey has played an innings of this sort. Yes, it's one-day cricket. It's different to test cricket, different sort of pressure. I get that. But when you look at it in terms of being in these type of situations where you're under pressure, you have to stand up. He's done it before, Carey, and he did it in that game at Old Trafford 3 years ago. And you think about it, you cast your mind to this test match, right? So it was a very similar position as he found in that game at Old Trafford back in 2020. it was a very similar position to what Australia were in this test match against New Zealand. Right. Okay, so he comes in at 5 for 80 in this run chase. He puts on 140 with Marsh for the 6th wicket. So it's very similar positions that he came in both times in these two games. Obviously, the ODI against England and Manchester, very similar situation to the test match here against New Zealand. So I'm not surprised that for Carey, obviously, maybe he would have sort of remembered what he did in that run chase at Old Trafford. Maybe I don't know. Maybe Alex Carey can speak of this. Was he actually thinking that I've actually been in this situation before? It was in a one-dayer in England, in Manchester, but it was a very similar position. So maybe he was feeding off that. Maybe he said, I've done this before. Yes, it's an ODI, but I've done it before. I can do it again here in a test match and really stand up. And that's what he did. So I think the two innings are very similar. And the situation of the match was very similar, even though it's a test match in a one-dayer. But still, I thought many people didn't quite refer to that game where Carey actually hit those runs. And, you know, he played pretty well in that game as well, scored 100. Obviously it was his first one-day century as well, and a match-winning one with Glenn Maxwell, who also scored 100 in that game. So I was surprised that people didn't really mention that. But he has done it before where he's come in this situation and he stood up and did the job. So it's something for people to think about and say, yes, it makes sense. Obviously, no wonder he's done well in this situation here because he's already experienced this sort of pressure, this sort of situation in a game back 3 years ago in 2020. And now he's done it 4 years later in 2024 in a test match against New Zealand. And I think that's very important as a player. When you experience moments like this, when you come under pressure, you got to stand up, you got to score runs under pressure as a batter. If you've done it before, it can really help you. So with Carey, in this case, he's done it before, it's helped him again. And he can feed off what he did back in 2020. He can do the same here in 2024 and say, right, okay, I've done it before, I can do it again. And that's what he did. So I think that was quite an interesting comparison that I made there. Just something that I thought of. And it shows really that, you know, he's got the ability to do this. He's done it before. He's done it here. And there's no question or doubt that he could do this again whenever Australia need him to do it in the future. So it's really a career-defining innings from Alex Carey, that's for sure. In terms of that, also the other point that was made from people making a big fuss, I think, out of nothing, is that Alex Carey didn't get a century. Now, don't get me wrong, he did deserve a century, Carey. There's no doubt about that. But with Pat Cummins, obviously people are going to express their opinions and criticize Pat Cummins because people don't like Pat Cummins, and obviously for stuff off the cricket field, not so much on the cricket field, really. So that's why people are making a big deal that Carey didn't get a century because Cummins hit the winning runs or whatever. And I think we should remember that cricket's an individual sport. Yes, it is, with batting and bowling, but it's also a team game. You've got to put the team first. And, you know, afterwards, Carey wasn't too flustered about it. He said, no, I didn't really want to be on strike for that last ball. Obviously, I'm very happy with the innings, even if it was 100 or not. He was happy just to get Australia over the line and really perform well in a very important innings, really. So I think we're making a big fuss out of nothing, really. And I think people just need to remember that core principle about cricket. It's a team sport. Individual milestones should always come second. The team should always come first. And that's what happened in this case here. And that's what Alex Carey did. And I think we're making a big fuss out of nothing, really. But that's just the way it is. People will have their say on these particular matters. Anyway, just to finish up about Australia's batting, a pretty good effort, really. Certain people stood up. They haven't been at 100%. The top order's been poor. But it takes someone to stand up, like a Carey, a Marsh, even Labuschagne in the first innings, and even in the first test with Cameron Green. So despite Australia's batting not firing all cylinders, someone always stands up and plays an innings and builds a partnership of substance. And that's what we saw in this test match between Carey and Marsh and that partnership in the run chase. Labuschagne in the first innings, his innings was key with that 90, even though Australia's batting hasn't been performing well. So there's still plenty of work to do for Australia's top order and their batting going forward. But I think they'll be satisfied knowing that someone stood up under the pressure. And in this case, it was Alex Carey. And you can throw in Mitchell Marsh in there as well. His contribution should not go unnoticed. But it was mainly Alex Carey who stood up and really took that lead for Australia with the bat. So I think that's a pretty good performance and innings from him. And as I said before, he will get tremendous confidence from that going forward. So Australia's batting, not at their best. There's still plenty of work to do, but they did enough to get the job done in this test match. Just quickly, before we wrap up, just talk about the bowling for Australia. They did well to bowl New Zealand out for 162 in the first innings. Josh Hazlewood was pretty good with his 5-wicket haul. They did well to keep New Zealand to a lead of 279 and not go over 300 plus. I think that was the key for Australia. The pitch was starting to flatten out. The ball was getting softer. It was a new ball wicket. So I think Australia did pretty well to keep New Zealand under a lead of 300 plus. And in the end, 279 is the number they kept them to. So the Australian bowlers, they bowled pretty well as a unit, as you would expect. Pat Cummins was good in the second innings, picked up some crucial wickets. In the second innings, he got the big wickets of Williamson, Ravinder, which Australia really needed to get those two out to start the wickets column, getting that up and active. And also Nathan Lyon did well on a pitch that didn't really offer much turn for him. He picked up wickets, especially in the second innings. Josh Hazlewood, as I mentioned, bowled well for his fifer. Mitchell Starc was a little bit off, especially in the second innings. He didn't quite get it right. But in the first innings, he did well to get 3 wickets and go past Dennis Lilly's 355 to move into 4th place on the all-time Australian wicket-taking list in Test cricket for Australia. So the Australian bowlers, doing their job as always and showing why they are a very good bowling attack. They dropped some catches, Australia. Tom Latham was dropped by Carey in the second innings. Kugelin was dropped by Labuschagne in the second innings. In the end, those were the only 2 catches that were dropped of significant note. Apart from that, the fielding was pretty good, as you would expect from an Australian team. And the bowling, pretty good overall. I think Australia will be pleased with how they performed with the ball, especially in the first innings. The second innings was a bit more challenging. Pitch was a bit flatter. Ball was softer, bit easier for batting, but they still got the job done nonetheless. So I think overall Australia will be very, very pleased with certain aspects of their game. Not quite at 100% in terms of the batting, but they did enough to get the job done there. The bowling was good. They were able to pick up wickets when needed. So I think Australia will be pleased with the all-round performance in this second test against New Zealand here in Christchurch. And they will be very pleased with the result to win by 3 wickets and to win the series 2-0. Definitely happy with that. Now then, my final thoughts on this test match between New Zealand and Australia, the second test here at the Hagley Oval. I thought it was a great test match that ebbed and flowed. No team couldn't really take their opportunities to put the other team away. It was sort of an arm wrestle. One team was nudging ahead. The other team fought back. And it was back and forth as the 4 days progressed in this test match. And as I said, both teams had their opportunities. Australia could have got a very good first innings lead and could have batted once in this test match. Unfortunately, they couldn't do that. New Zealand fought back with the ball. Then New Zealand had an opportunity to bat Australia out of the test match. They couldn't do that. Australia were in a bit of trouble in the run chase, but obviously Carey, Marsh stood up, Cummins, and were able to get the job done. New Zealand crumbled under the pressure. So it was a test match that seesawed and went up and down as the match progressed. We also saw some standout performances. Hazelwood, Henry with the ball, taking 5 wickets. Alex Carey's innings, of course. So we saw some good performances with bat and ball throughout this test match. Australia should have lost this match. They were 4 down for 34. They were 5 for 80, chasing 279. You should lose a test match from that position. But as Australian teams do, they always find a way to come back from very difficult situations, and that's what happened in this test match. Unfortunately for New Zealand, they missed golden opportunities with the bat, with the ball in the field, cost them dearly, and it cost them this test match in the end. And, New Zealand, reflecting on this test match, they'll be very disappointed that they weren't able to grab those key opportunities when they arose. So to finish off, a pretty exciting test match, regardless of the result. I think it was a good test match all round. And I think we saw some good cricket over the 4 days. In the end, Australia too strong. New Zealand, got a lot of work to do as a test side going forward from this series against Australia. They've got a lot of questions to ask themselves mentally, and also in terms of a cricket side going forward. Well, thanks everyone for listening to our second test review between New Zealand and Australia. If you're watching or listening to this episode of the podcast on our YouTube channel, let us know your thoughts on the second test between New Zealand and Australia in the comments. We would love to hear what you have to say. Also, the podcast is now on Patreon, and we've recently got a Patreon page set up for the podcast. So if you want to become a Patreon member of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast and become a Dibbly Dobbler Patreon member, the link to that is in the description of this episode. All you need to do is to click the link and sign up to become a member of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast Patreon and join us on Patreon. So that will be available in the description of this episode, the link to our Patreon. Make sure you sign up. We're not forcing you to become a Patreon member. You can become a member if you want. If you don't want to be a member, that's okay. Subscribing, following us on our social medias is much appreciated, as we always appreciate that support from everyone. So yet again, if you want to be a Patreon member, go and find the link in the description and sign up to Patreon and become a Dibbly Dobbler Patreon member on the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast Patreon. Thanks for watching. Until next time, keep safe and bye for now.